Welcome back to Terry's Lounge, folks. I'm your host, Toilet Terry. On this episode, we are going to start by, of course, as usual, how many dad jokes can I tell in a minute, followed by how many yo mama jokes can I tell in a minute, and then, y'all guessed it, how many storytelling jokes can I tell in 1 minute. Let's get started with the dad jokes, shall we? Why can't a nose be 12 inches? Because then it would be a foot. What does a lemon say when it answers the phone? Yellow. The graveyard that I passed by earlier looks overly crowded. People must be dying to get in. What kind of car does an egg drive? A Volkswagen. What kind of comb does a bee use to comb its hair? A honeycomb. What do you call cheese that is not yours? Nacho cheese. How do you make a tissue dance? Put a little boogie in it. Nice work on the dad jokes. Now for the yo mama jokes. Yo mama so stupid, she tried to eat M&M. Yo mama so dumb, she climbed over a glass wall to see what was on the other side. Yo mama so dumb, she made her own complimentary breakfast. Yo mama is so dumb. She went to the eye doctor to get an iPhone. Yo mama so stupid, she went to the dentist to get a Bluetooth. Yo mama so dumb, she got locked in the grocery store overnight and starved to death. Yo mama so dumb, she took a ruler to bed to see how long she slept. Yo mama so dumb, she put airbags in her computer in case it crashed. Nice work on the yo mama jokes. Now for the storytelling jokes. There's a beautiful woman, her first day in heaven. She is told not to step on any ducks or there are consequences. The first few days she doesn't step on any ducks, but her fourth day in heaven she accidentally steps on one. God says, sorry, there are consequences for your actions. So he handcuffs her to this ugly man. This other beautiful woman, her first day in heaven, she's told not to step on any ducks or there are consequences. Her second day in, she steps on a duck. Sorry, there are consequences, so she's handcuffed to an ugly man. And then there's this ugly woman, her first day in heaven. She's told the same thing, but she does it anyway. She's handcuffed to this beautiful man. She's like, why is he so beautiful? And God says, because he stepped on a duck. I hope you guys got a kick out of those jokes. I know I did. It is now time for...
My wife and I have always preferred exploring the mountains over the seashore, although we've made trips to both, and we really like both. But we're fortunate to live in a part of the state of Georgia where we have the foothills of North Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee, all within a few hours' drive of our home. So back in about the 1980s, we purchased a small piece of land right outside of Blue Ridge, Georgia. We built a cabin there so that we could indulge our love of the mountains whenever we wanted to. At about this same time, again, back in the 1980s, we discovered another way to feed our passion for the mountains, and that is visiting bed and breakfast, which were the hot thing back in that day. B&B lodgings began to spring up all over the place in the South, and we began seeking them out. and we always enjoyed the places we stayed. We stayed at some of the smallest homes that had unbelievable histories. We've eaten some of the best food, slept in some of the oldest structures, many of them unrestored, and experienced spectacular mountain views and met some of the most intriguing people that you will ever meet. But none can rival the couple that we met at a lodge high in the mountains of North Carolina. The lodge is named the Swag, and it's near the town of Waynesville, North Carolina. It's situated between the dip where two mountains come together. That's what a swag is. And it offers views that are just spectacular. The mornings are always cool and crisp, even in the summertime. The site is very isolated and removed from civilization, and since 3 gourmet meals are served there every day, most guests don't even bother driving back down the mountain to the nearby town. There are miles of hiking trails, unusual wildflowers to discover, a fishing pond, a well-stocked library. All these accommodations are nestled inside ancient log structures, and each one has its own story to tell. There's plenty to do at the Swag. This story begins back in the 1970s when New Yorkers, Reverend Dan Matthews and his wife, Denier, brought their children to this remote area of North Carolina on a camping trip, and they just fell in love with the area, and they came back many times. The land where they liked to pitch their tent was at the edge of a small meadow, which was situated between two mountains, and the locals told them that this area was called the Swag, and to their amazement, it was for sale. The obvious problem was the sheer isolation of the spot. It was over 2 miles from the base of the mountain up to the top, and there was no road that led up there. So they wanted to build a vacation home here, but how would they do it this high up in the mountains? And since Dan was the rector of the Trinity Church on Wall Street in New York, I'm sure prayer played a part in their plan. After the family returned to New York, Denier, Dan's wife, made arrangements to return back to North Carolina to begin the research and planning for their new mountain home. Local contractors quickly began carving a road into the mountainside. The task took several months. The road was long, rocky, very narrow, and over 2 miles long. Even today, every driver must stop at the bottom of the mountain, roll down your car window, and sound your car horn very loudly for a minute or so, and then wait and listen. If no car horn answered you back, it was safe to go to the top. Did I say it was isolated? Boy, it is. But the trip is worth this effort. So the exploits of Denier and Dan were beyond what most of us might attempt, but they persevered. And the result is the creation of a rambling collection of ancient log buildings that the Matthews were anxious to share with family and with friends. Over time, the reputation of the Swag spread, and Dan and Denier decided to open their retreat to paying guests, and the Swag Resort Lodge was born. You may have surmised that the two intriguing people that I mentioned at the beginning are Dan and Denier Matthews, but you'd be wrong. As delightful and interesting as they are, the two fascinating and charming people that Sue and I met at the Swag are George and Margaret Carey. Who are they? Listen up. Our first trip there was memorable and lots of fun, and we were anxious to go back. So reservations were made for a fall visit. You instantly feel a sense of peace when you get out of your car. The first thing you notice as you exit your car is the drop in temperature, and the absolute quiet is at first very unnerving. Check-in is always pleasant and includes a greeting from Denier. We told her this was our second stay, and she announced how much she appreciated us coming back. But I think you're going to enjoy this stay even more, she said. She said there's going to be an activity tonight before dinner. We hope you'll come. She had invited a representative from the Park Service to come and speak about the local ecology in the mountains. Once before, we heard a local preacher, a comedian, speak, and I've never laughed so hard in my life. So we expected this to be a very informative and good encounter with the other guests. So we said we'd be there. Wanting to get a good seat, we arrived at the meeting room about 20 minutes early and settled into 2 comfortable chairs. A few minutes passed and I noticed an older couple entering the meeting room through the large double doors. They made a beeline straight for us. He thrust out his hand and said, "How are you? I'm George. This is my wife, Margaret." It was hard to miss his distinct British accent. Standing and grasping his hand, I smiled and introduced us and said, "Where are you folks from?" "Well, we're from London," he said, "and we're here on holiday." We learned that this couple was staying in the very large private cabin that was set aside for larger groups. It's placed away from the main compound, and they had 2 friends with them. I thought it was strange that they allowed only 4 people to occupy the big cabin. George and Margaret were sitting at the head of the table, a spot that's normally reserved for the owners. So Dan rose and announced, as he had done several hundred times before, "It's my custom to say grace before every meal, but this evening I want to break with tradition and ask my good friend George Carey to lead us in our prayer." My friends, it's my distinct honor and a real privilege to introduce you to the Archbishop of Canterbury and his wife, Margaret. George stood. There was an audible gasp from the crowd. No one said a word. George stood, he smiled, and recited a beautiful and touching prayer. Then Dan thanked the Archbishop and made a heartfelt request to each of us. It's very difficult for George and Margaret to travel in Europe without being recognized, so I told them, if you could ever find a way to come to America, we have the perfect place for you to visit where you can relax, unwind, enjoy the beauty of nature, and all without fear of the media and large crowds bothering you. All we ask is that you respect their privacy. Don't discuss their presence outside this setting, but enjoy your time with George and Margaret. And by the way, that's what they want to be called, George and Margaret. Let's eat. George knew that he would be center stage, and he gracefully answered questions and spoke to every person in the room, asking their names and asking them where they were from. Questions ranged from how often do you meet with the Queen? What is Prince Charles really like? Where do you live? And what's a typical day like for an archbishop? We learned that the woman traveling with the archbishop was his personal secretary, and the man that was with them was very likely in charge of security. During the week, we saw George and Margaret often on the hiking trails or at breakfast, reading in the library, or sitting by the small pond or on the large front porch. They always spoke, always remembered our names. Sue and I had several brief conversations with them, and we found them to be very likable people, not pompous or arrogant in any way. We learned that the Archbishop is the head of the Church of England. Among them, the Trinity Church on Wall Street, where Dan is the rector. In essence, he is Dan's boss. We also learned that the Archbishop is the highest-ranking non-royal in all of Britain. George explained that during a trip to London recently for church business, Dan issued an invitation to come to the swag, never thinking that the Archbishop would actually come, but he did. As I think back on this encounter, I believe the event that will forever remain in my mind occurred for us at checkout. We had concluded our stay of several days, and we were at the front desk settling our account and chatting with Denier when the Archbishop walked up. "Leaving so soon?" he said. "Well, I hate to see you go. We've certainly enjoyed our visits with the 2 of you. So just let me say that if you're ever in London, please come by our place where we live at Lambeth Place." That's where they live. It's a castle. "Tell the secretary there that you're an old friend of the Archbishop, and I'll give you a personal tour. It's quite a place." Well, that settles it. Our next trip needs to be to London to visit with our new friends, George and Margaret.
It is now time again for impressions, starting right now. How you doing today, young man? How you doing today, little girl?
I love cheese. I love sweets. I love sugar. Hi, John. It's good to see you again. Hi, Annabelle. It's good to see you again.
Well, I hope you guys got a good kick out of those impressions. It is now time for...
It was early December, and it was really cold that night. It had been raining and the wind was blowing. And Sue and I got home from being out. We ate some dinner and decided we just want to jump into a warm bed because it's really miserable outside. So we did that and pretty quickly fell asleep. Well, after we'd been asleep for an hour or two, the phone rang. And you know how it is when the phone rings late at night. You really suspect the worst. You think there's a problem. There's an emergency with a family member. Something's not right. So we were jarred awake, and I grabbed the phone beside the bed and I said, hello. And I heard a really familiar voice. It was Chris, our son. And he said, Daddy, I hate to call you so late, but I got a problem and I'm not sure what to do, and I need to talk to you and Sue about it. I said, well, tell me, what's going on? Sue sat up in bed. He said, well, Gina, that's his wife, and I were fixing to go to bed, and we went out on the front porch just to get a breath of fresh air. And Gina said, listen to that. Do you hear that? And Chris said, it's a dog howling. He's almost crying. Where's that coming from? And Gina said, I think it's coming from the church right next door. King Springs Baptist Church happens to be the church where the Terry family goes. So they got Annabelle, their daughter, and they walked around the corner to the church parking lot, and the noise kept getting louder. They could hear this dog howling. As they got closer to the church, it got louder. And suddenly they saw it. A young boxer puppy, cute little boxer female, tied to the railing at one of the entrances to the church. Now the dog was exposed to the weather, looked pretty frail, malnourished, thin, but like all boxers, she was wagging her little behind. She was so glad to see anybody. And as I said, like boxers are prone to do, she began wagging her little behind. Now boxers don't have a tail, so her little butt was just going back and forth, and she was thrilled to see anybody. She'd been abandoned. Somebody had tied her to the railing of that entry to the church and just left her. So Chris said, I don't know what to do. We can't leave her here. It's about 11 o'clock at night. What do you think we should do? Well, as soon as Sue heard that, she jumped up out of bed and instantly got on the computer and started searching the web. And she went to the Humane Society site. She went to the county animal control site. She began looking for rescue operations, anybody that could help us with this boxer that had been abandoned. And she found pretty quickly on the county site that their strong recommendation is to call 911. The police are used to getting these kinds of calls, and they will know what to do. So that's what we recommended, and that's what Chris did. Now what he found out was that all the patrol officers were busy, and they said, we'll get to you eventually. It just may not be any time real soon. You're gonna have to take care of that dog until we can get there. So they took the dog back home. They fed it, and it was starved. They gave it some loving, fixed a little bed for it, introduced it to their other dogs. Did I mention they have 3 other dogs? And the other dogs were okay with this boxer. I think they knew that she was really in distress. and they accepted her. So the next morning, the police still hadn't called, and they had this boxer. So Gina posted on several sites, Facebook and some others, the story of this dog and said, if anybody can help or if anybody knows anything about this dog, let us know. And some of the answers that she got back almost instantly went something like this: I'm praying that somebody takes this dog. Another one said, sweet baby, she's so precious. Can I help? Another one said, I know a boxer rescue. I'll call them. So this went on all during the day. It wasn't very long before one of Gina's friends called and said, I have somebody that I think wants the dog. They have 3 dogs. They don't live too far from here, out in West Georgia. And they just recently lost a 4th dog, and it was a boxer. And they want another boxer. So Chris was cautious and careful and leery and wanted to be sure this was the right thing to do for this boxer. So he called the people and told them, you got to come over here and let me interview you. So they did. They came that afternoon, and the husband instantly loved this dog. The wife wasn't quite so sure, but they agreed to take the dog home. So they left with the boxer. Later that evening, they emailed Gina back and said, we've decided to name her Molly. And they had stopped on the way home and bought a new dog bed for the puppy and some treats and some biscuits, and they took her home to introduce her to their other dogs. Well, everything went okay for a couple of days until their smallest dog, a little Chihuahua, decided she did not like Molly. She began barking and running around the house, and then she went under the bed and wouldn't come out. She refused to eat, and then when she did come out, she began marking all over the house, and that is not a good thing. So the man called Chris back and said, you know, I told my wife we were going to have to get rid of that Chihuahua because I want to keep this boxer, but the wife was having none of it. And she said, no, we've had the Chihuahua for 8 years, and she's a member of the family, so we're just going to have to return Molly to Chris and Gina. So they did. So we're back to square one. Well, it was really only a matter of a couple of days before other people began to hear the story about Molly, and they began calling and emailing and talking on Facebook, and several people wanted the dog. So Chris and Gina settled on a family in Blue Ridge, Georgia that had other dogs, one of which was a boxer. And they came and they got Molly. And Molly fit that family perfectly, and she's happy. And that's really the story of Molly the Christmas dog. Merry Christmas, Molly.
I wrote down random questions, and then I had my assistant, Teddy Tidwell, write down random words. 10 questions, 10 random words. I read the questions, he reads the words, and whatever the words are the answers. Let's get started, shall we? What is one word your mama uses to describe you? Harry. What is your great-great-grandfather's first name? Fart knocker. Who was Frederick Douglass? Yo mama. Who is Donald Duck's evil cousin? Pennywise. What is the First Amendment? Alfred. What is one thing you wish you could throw away? Your mother-in-law? What is big and chunky? Harriet Tubman? Who is the team captain of your football team? Turkey Butthole? What is your pet gerbil's name? I like to fart. Who is your grandmother's worst enemy? Dr. Fart. Well, that's all we have time for, folks. I hope you guys got a kick out of that. I know I did. To conclude, as usual, I am going to be reading 3 different letters from 3 different toiletarians. And they're probably going to be just as ridiculous as ever. As always, let's get started. Dear kid who bullied me through grade school. I never bullied anybody as a kid. You are still stealing my lunch money. Sincerely, I asked for no mayo. What is wrong with you people? Alright, now I'm going to read this one. Dear Call of Duty, you win this round. Sincerely, ignored naked girlfriend. That's actually pretty funny. Okay, last one. It says here, Dear America, why won't you run on me instead of donuts? Sincerely, treadmill. Okay. Well, I hope you guys got a good kick out of this episode. I know I did. Don't forget to drop a like on this video if you liked it. Hit that subscribe button for more upcoming content, which will be amazing. Y'all won't want to miss it? Alright. Keep it real. Peace out.